I'm Emma, 32, and the moment I opened my eyes after emergency heart surgery, my world crumbled. My beloved grandmother's vineyard, my sanctuary since childhood, had been sold by my mother-in-law Patricia while I lay unconscious on the operating table. "You're too sick to run it anyway," she sneered when I confronted her. "Someone healthy should have it." What she didn't know was that my grandmother Rose was cleverer than all of us combined. The look on Patricia's face the next day was worth every moment of pain. Before I continue this story of betrayal and sweet justice, let me tell you how I got here. Sunset Valley Vineyard wasn't just a business to me. It was the foundation of my happiest memories. My grandmother Rose Mitchell bought the property when I was just 6 years old, and from that moment on, every summer became magical. The sprawling 15-acre vineyard sat in the rolling hills of Northern California, with the main house perched on a gentle slope overlooking rows upon rows of carefully tended grapevines. The guest cottage nestled among the oak trees was where I stayed during those childhood summers. I can still close my eyes and smell the lavender bushes mixing with the scent of Grandma Rose's famous morning coffee. Every dawn, we'd sit on the wraparound porch watching the morning mist rise from the valley as the sun painted the vines in golden light. Grandma would tell me stories about her own childhood, lessons about patience and hard work, and wisdom about life that I carry with me to this day. "This place teaches you everything you need to know about life, Emma," she'd say, using my full name in that serious way of hers while pointing to the vines. "You plant with hope, tend with care, and harvest with gratitude. But most importantly, you wait for the right time." Little did I know how prophetic those words would become. 3 years ago, when Grandma Rose passed away at 89, I was devastated. We'd remained incredibly close even after I grew up and moved to San Francisco for my career in wine marketing. I'd visit at least twice a month, sometimes bringing my husband David, though he never quite understood the magic of the place or the complexity of the wine business. At Grandma's funeral, I learned she'd left the vineyard to me specifically, rather than dividing it among family members. Emma was the only one who truly understood this land's purpose. Her lawyer, Mr. Henderson, had explained to the family, reading from a letter Grandma had written. "The others see dollar signs. Emma sees the soul of Sunset Valley." That's when I first noticed the look in my mother-in-law's eyes. Patricia Williams had always been controlling, but until that moment, she'd masked it well beneath a veneer of polished sophistication and passive-aggressive comments. David was her only child, and in her mind, anything that belonged to me should rightfully belong to him, and by extension, to her. "How generous of Rose," she'd said at the reception, her smile tight. "Though it seems like such a burden for someone as busy as you, dear." David and I had been married for 4 years by then. We'd met at a wine industry conference where I was handling marketing for a boutique winery, and he was representing his tech consulting firm. The attraction had been immediate. His easy confidence and genuine interest in my work had won me over. For the first 2 years, our marriage had been everything I'd hoped for. We traveled, built our careers, and talked about starting a family. But things began to change after David's father passed away. Patricia became increasingly present in our lives, dropping by unannounced, calling multiple times a day, and inserting herself into our decision-making. David, feeling responsible for his mother's well-being, found it difficult to set boundaries. "She's just lonely," he'd say whenever I expressed frustration. "She doesn't mean anything by it." The vineyard inheritance became a frequent topic of conversation during family dinners. Patricia would casually mention how family properties should stay in the family, or ask pointed questions about whether I planned to sell it since you two barely have time to visit anyway. Each comment felt like a small paper cut, minor in isolation, but stinging when accumulated. What neither of them knew was that I'd been visiting the vineyard alone on days when I claimed to be working late. Those solitary afternoons became my sanctuary as my health began to deteriorate. The first symptoms were easy to dismiss: unusual fatigue, chest pain, occasional shortness of breath. But when I found myself unable to climb the stairs to our apartment without stopping to rest, I finally sought medical help. The diagnosis came 8 months after Grandma's death: hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, a genetic condition where the heart muscle becomes abnormally thick, making it harder for the heart to pump blood. The treatment plan was intensive: medication, lifestyle changes, and careful monitoring. I kept it largely to myself at first, not wanting to worry David or give Patricia another reason to view me as weak. But as my condition worsened, surgery became inevitable. My heart was failing, and I needed a procedure to remove excess muscle tissue. That's when Patricia's helpful facade intensified. She insisted on organizing our paperwork in case decisions need to be made quickly, and began suggesting that the stress of maintaining the vineyard might be contributing to my illness. Perhaps selling would be for the best, she suggested one evening while helping me pack for the hospital. The market is excellent right now, and you could use the money for your treatment. I noticed how she said you instead of we, as if my medical expenses weren't a shared concern with David. Something in her tone sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with my condition. The vineyard isn't for sale, I said firmly, meeting her eyes. It never will be. She smiled that tight smile again. Of course, dear. I'm just thinking of your health. The night before my surgery, as I lay in bed trying to calm my racing thoughts, I overheard David and Patricia talking in the kitchen. Their voices were hushed, but one phrase cut through clearly in Patricia's distinctive tone. She's not thinking rationally right now. Sometimes we need to make difficult decisions for those we love. In my gut, I knew they weren't just talking about my medical care. The cardiomyopathy had progressed faster than my doctors anticipated. What began as mild symptoms evolved into severe heart failure that required immediate surgical intervention. The procedure, called a septal myectomy, involved removing part of the thickened heart muscle to improve blood flow. It carried significant risks, but without it, my prognosis was grim. As the surgery date approached, I noticed a shift in the dynamic between David and Patricia. They spoke in hushed tones that ceased when I entered the room, exchanged meaningful glances over dinner, and seemed to be coordinating something behind my back. 2 weeks before my scheduled surgery, Patricia arrived at our apartment with a stack of papers and a concerned expression that didn't quite reach her eyes. I've been speaking with our family lawyer, she announced, setting the papers on our dining table. With your condition, David should have power of attorney, just to be safe. David nodded too quickly. It makes sense, Sam. If you're unconscious and decisions need to be made. I studied the documents she brought, immediately noticing they weren't limited to medical decisions. The power of attorney form was comprehensive, covering financial and property matters as well. When I pointed this out, Patricia waved dismissively. It's just standard language, dear. No one expects to use any of it. That night I called my friend Jessica, who had never warmed to either David or Patricia. When I explained the situation, her response was immediate and alarmed. Don't sign anything that broad, she warned. Get your own lawyer to draw up a limited medical power of attorney. There's something off about this whole thing. The next day, I visited my own attorney and had proper documents drawn up, medical decisions only, with specific limitations. When I presented these to David instead of signing Patricia's papers, the flash of disappointment across his face confirmed my growing suspicions. This doesn't cover everything, he said, frowning at the more limited document. It covers what's necessary, I replied. My medical decisions. Later that week, I returned home early from a doctor's appointment to find Patricia sitting at our kitchen table with a man in a suit. They were looking at photographs of the vineyard spread across the surface. When I entered, they jumped apart like guilty teenagers, and the man hurriedly gathered his materials. This is Robert Martinez, Patricia said smoothly. An old friend who works in real estate. He was just giving us advice on property values for insurance purposes. Robert nodded too enthusiastically. Beautiful property you have. Great potential. I'll send those insurance comparison rates to your email, Mrs. Williams. After he left, I confronted Patricia. Why are you discussing my property with a real estate agent? Don't be paranoid, Emma, she replied. The stress is making you irrational. David and I are just trying to make sure everything is properly valued and protected while you focus on getting well. That night, I overheard another conversation between them. David's voice was hesitant. I don't know, Mom. She's really attached to that place. Maybe we should respect that. Respect won't pay for specialized treatments if her condition worsens, Patricia responded. She's not thinking clearly right now. The vineyard is just sitting there, barely breaking even. If she truly loved you, she'd want to secure your future. The next day, I called Grandma Rose's lawyer, Mr. Henderson, and explained my concerns. His response was immediate and reassuring. Your grandmother anticipated something like this might happen, he said cryptically. Come to my office tomorrow. There are some things you should know. At Mr. Henderson's office, he showed me additional paperwork my grandmother had prepared before her death. Rose was a shrewd woman who understood family dynamics all too well, Mr. Henderson explained, displaying a complex deed arrangement. What your relatives don't know is that the vineyard property was actually subdivided into 3 separate legal entities. The guest cottage and tasting room is one property, the production facility and cellars is another, and the main house with the original vineyard acreage is the third. All are in your name, but with different legal protections. He continued, showing me additional documents with my grandmother's signature. Furthermore, she established a trust with specific conditions. Any attempt to sell any portion of the property without your explicit written consent, not power of attorney, but your direct signature, triggers a clause that consolidates full ownership rights to you alone and nullifies any claims from other family members, including your husband. Relief washed over me. Grandma Rose had thought of everything. Rose had seen family properties disputed before. Mr. Henderson nodded. She wanted to make sure your inheritance remained yours, regardless of circumstances. Before leaving his office, I made 2 decisions. First, I retrieved all the important property documents and placed them in a safe deposit box that only I could access. Second, I asked Mr. Henderson to prepare paperwork for a post-nuptial agreement protecting my inherited assets. When I returned home that evening, I found David and Patricia huddled together at the dining room table again, papers spread between them. They quickly gathered everything when they saw me. Just going over some hospital paperwork, David said, not meeting my eyes. Medical bills are so complicated these days, Patricia added with a tight smile. That night, while David was showering, I checked his phone and found text messages between him and Robert Martinez discussing market value and quick sale options. There was also a message from Patricia. Remember, this is for her own good. She'll thank us later. The betrayal cut deep, but I maintained my composure. The surgery was just days away, and I needed to focus on my health first. I called Jessica again, asking her to be my medical proxy instead of David. Of course, she said without hesitation. And I'll keep an eye on things while you're recovering. The day before my surgery, while packing my hospital bag, I discovered a business card that had fallen from Patricia's purse during her last visit. It belonged to Robert Martinez, with a handwritten note on the back. Vineyard properties selling fast. Can expedite closing within 48 hours for right price. My hands trembled as I tucked the card into my wallet as evidence. That night, as David slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling, my heart heavy with the certainty that the 2 people who should have been protecting me were plotting behind my back. The vineyard wasn't just property to me, it was my connection to Grandma Rose, my sanctuary, my heritage. And they were planning to take it away, while I was at my most vulnerable. The morning of my surgery arrived with a thick fog that matched my mood. David seemed distracted as he drove me to the hospital, checking his phone at every red light and speaking in clipped, nervous sentences. When we arrived, Patricia was already in the waiting area, her presence unexpected and unwelcome. I thought you were visiting your sister in Portland, I said, unable to keep the suspicion from my voice. And, miss being here for my daughter-in-law's surgery? What kind of mother-in-law would that make me? Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Besides, David needs support too. The pre-op preparations moved quickly. My vital signs were taken, IVs inserted, and consent forms signed. Throughout it all, David remained oddly distant, stepping out twice to take phone calls. As the nurses prepared to wheel me into the operating room, I reached for his hand. Remember, only the medical decisions we discussed, I said firmly. Nothing else while I'm under. A flash of guilt crossed his face before he nodded. Of course. I love you, Em. Those were the last words I heard before the anesthesia took effect. The surgery was complex and lasted nearly 7 hours. According to my doctors, there were complications that required additional procedures. When I finally regained consciousness in the recovery room, the pain was immediate and overwhelming. Through the haze of medication and discomfort, I became aware of someone sitting beside my bed. Not David, as I'd expected, but Patricia. "Where's David?" I mumbled, my mouth dry and words slurred. "Taking care of important matters," she replied vaguely. "How are you feeling, dear?" Before I could respond, a nurse came to check my vitals and adjust my medication. As she worked, she chatted cheerfully. "You have such a caring mother-in-law," she said. "She's been telling us all about the big changes happening in your family. A vineyard sale is exciting, even under these circumstances." My heart monitor betrayed my sudden spike in panic, beeping rapidly. The nurse looked concerned. "Try to stay calm. Your body needs rest." Patricia's expression remained placid, but there was something triumphant in her eyes. "Don't worry about anything right now," she said. "We've taken care of everything while you focus on healing." The implications of her words and the nurse's comment were clear, but in my weakened state, I couldn't formulate a response. The increased pain medication soon pulled me back into a fitful sleep filled with dreams of the vineyard slipping away from me. When I woke again hours later, David was finally there, sitting in the chair previously occupied by his mother. He looked tired and wouldn't meet my eyes. "What have you done?" I whispered, my voice stronger now despite the pain. "What's best for everyone," he replied, still looking at the floor. "Mom helped me see that holding on to the vineyard was selfish when we could use that money for your treatment and our future. You sold my grandmother's vineyard without my consent." Each word was a struggle against rising anger and betrayal. We had to act quickly. Robert found a cash buyer willing to close immediately. "The market might have changed if we waited for you to." He trailed off, finally looking at me with a mixture of guilt and defiance. "To what? Wake up? Have a say in my own inheritance." My voice cracked with emotion. Before he could respond, a hospital volunteer entered with a large flower arrangement. "Special delivery from Mrs. Williams. Looks like congratulations are in order." The card attached read, "Congratulations on the successful sale. Closing complete. Funds transferred. Robert Martinez Realty." The volunteer's cheerful smile faltered as she sensed the tension in the room. She placed the flowers on the side table and quickly excused herself. I stared at David, tears streaming down my face. "How could you do this to me?" He ran his hands through his hair in frustration. "You don't understand. Your medical bills are astronomical, even with insurance. The specialists you need, the ongoing treatment, we're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars. The vineyard was just sitting there, barely profitable most of the time." "It was my decision to make," I said, my voice now eerily calm through my tears. "Not yours. Certainly not your mother's." As if summoned by her mention, Patricia appeared in the doorway. Seeing me awake and the flowers delivered, she entered with the confident stride of someone who believed herself victorious. "I see you've heard our good news," she said, settling herself at the foot of my bed. "I know you're upset now, but you'll thank us later. That old vineyard was far too much responsibility for someone in your condition." "You had no right," I said, each word deliberate despite my weakened state. "Right?" she laughed, a cold sound devoid of humor. "Let's talk about rights, shall we? That vineyard should have gone to family who could properly manage it, not to someone who visits occasionally and is now too sick to even maintain it." Her facade of concern had completely dropped, revealing the ugly truth of her resentment. "You don't deserve it, Emma. You never did. Rose should have left it to blood family who would honor her legacy, not watch it deteriorate while they're laid up in hospital beds." David made a weak attempt to intervene. "Mom, that's enough." "No, David, she needs to hear this," Patricia continued, her voice rising. "We did what was necessary. The money is already in our account. The papers are signed. It's done." "How did you get my signature?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. David at least had the decency to look ashamed. "Mom thought it would be easier to just handle it since you gave me power of attorney." For medical decisions only, I interrupted. Not for selling my property. Patricia waved dismissively.
Details.
What matters is that it's done. The buyers are already planning renovations. They're tearing down that old guest cottage next week to build something more modern. Each word was another knife in my heart. The cottage where I'd spent summers with Grandma Rose, where she taught me to identify different grape varieties and understand the rhythms of the seasons, would be demolished. Her memory erased by strangers who saw only real estate value. Get out, I whispered. Don't be dramatic, Patricia began. Get out, I shouted, setting off alarms on my monitors as my blood pressure spiked dangerously. Nurses rushed in, quickly assessing the situation and firmly asking both David and Patricia to leave. As they administered medication to calm me, I caught Patricia's last words to David in the hallway. See? She's hysterical. We absolutely made the right decision. Alone with the medical staff, I closed my eyes and focused on breathing through the pain, both physical and emotional. They had betrayed me in the worst possible way, taking advantage of my vulnerability to steal what mattered most. But beneath my grief, a small voice reminded me of my visit to Mr. Henderson and the protections my grandmother had put in place. I just needed to hold on until I could contact him. If what Patricia said was true, and the sale had already closed, I needed to act quickly. As the medication took effect again, I drifted off with one thought providing cold comfort. Grandma Rose was smarter than all of us combined. There was still hope. I woke the next morning to a nurse checking my vitals and a heaviness in my chest that had nothing to do with my physical condition. The betrayal by my husband and mother-in-law had settled into my bones, a cold weight that made even breathing feel like an effort. David hadn't returned after being ejected from my room, not even a text message asking about my condition. His absence confirmed everything I needed to know about his priorities. As the nurse finished her checks, she mentioned that my phone had been ringing. Someone's eager to reach you, she said, handing me the device. For calls already this morning. The number wasn't one I recognized, but I answered anyway, my voice still rough from sleep and intubation. Mrs. Williams? This is Robert Martinez from Valley Vista Realty. The voice was professional, but tinged with confusion. I hope I'm not disturbing your recovery, but there seems to be some confusion about the property sale that I hoped you could clarify. My heart rate quickened. What confusion, Mr. Martinez? Well, he hesitated. Your mother-in-law facilitated the sale of the guest cottage and tasting room property at Sunset Valley, which closed yesterday. But when our clients visited this morning to take measurements, they noticed construction markers on the adjacent Vineyard property. When they inquired with a neighbor about accessing that section, they were told it was still owned by you and not part of their purchase. I closed my eyes, relief washing over me like a cool wave. Grandma's planning had worked. Mr. Martinez, I said carefully, could you tell me exactly what property was sold yesterday? The precise legal description? I heard papers shuffling. According to the deed, it's Lot 15C of the Sunset Valley subdivision, consisting of the guest cottage structure, tasting room, and 2.3 acres of the property including the parking area and entry road. And who signed the sales documents? I asked, already knowing the answer, but needing confirmation. More paper shuffling. Well, that's actually another matter I wanted to discuss. The documents were signed with your name, but Mrs. Patricia Williams handled all the negotiations and closing details. She presented a power of attorney document, but our title company is questioning its applicability to real estate transactions. They're concerned there might be irregularities. There are indeed irregularities, Mr. Martinez, I said, my voice growing stronger with each word. I never authorized the sale of any part of my property, and the power of attorney my husband held was strictly limited to medical decisions during my surgery. What you're describing sounds like fraud. There was a long pause before Robert responded, his tone now notably more cautious. I see. This is concerning. Our firm prides itself on ethical transactions. If what you're saying is accurate, we may have a serious legal situation on our hands. We certainly do, I agreed. But before we go further, I need to contact my attorney. Could you hold off on any further actions regarding either property until you hear from him? Of course, Robert replied quickly. Please have your attorney contact me directly. And Mrs. Williams, I apologize for any distress this has caused during your recovery. After ending the call, I immediately phoned Mr. Henderson. Despite the early hour, he answered on the second ring. Emma, are you all right? How was the surgery? The surgery was successful, I said, but Patricia and David sold the guest cottage property while I was unconscious. Mr. Henderson's sharp intake of breath was followed by a low chuckle. Did they now? And did they happen to forge your signature using that limited medical power of attorney? Exactly that, I confirmed. Then they've triggered Rose's fraud protection clause, he said, satisfaction evident in his voice. Your grandmother anticipated something like this might happen. Not specifically during surgery, of course, but she was concerned about undue influence or pressure from your husband's family. What exactly does the clause do? I asked. It's quite elegant in its simplicity, Mr. Henderson explained. Any unauthorized attempt to sell or transfer any portion of the property without your explicit consent automatically triggers a transfer of full ownership rights to you alone. Additionally, it nullifies any claim your husband might have had to any property in a divorce proceeding or inheritance situation. And the guest cottage sale, is it valid? That's where it gets interesting, Mr. Henderson said. Technically, the sale itself could be challenged as fraudulent since it was executed under false pretenses with a forged signature. However, the fraud protection clause doesn't automatically invalidate the transaction. It just ensures that all proceeds from such a sale go directly to you, not to the person who facilitated it. So the money from the sale should legally be mine, not theirs?
Precisely.
And I'm guessing they've already received and possibly spent some of it. Patricia mentioned the funds were already in their account. I confirmed. Perfect, Mr. Henderson said, and I could practically hear him smiling. That's conversion of your assets, possibly grand theft, depending on the amount. Between the forged signature, misrepresentation of the power of attorney, and conversion of funds, they've given us everything we need. What should I do next? I asked, already feeling stronger despite my physical condition. First, I'll contact the title company and the real estate agent to inform them of the situation. Then I'll file emergency injunctions to freeze any accounts where the proceeds might have been deposited. Finally, I'll prepare documentation for the sheriff to deliver formal notice of the fraud protection clause being triggered. How soon can you make this happen? I'm making calls right now, Mr. Henderson said firmly. We'll move forward with everything. After ending the call, I lay back against my pillows, processing everything. The guest cottage was gone. That hurt deeply. But the main vineyard was secure. More importantly, David and Patricia's betrayal had backfired spectacularly, thanks to my grandmother's foresight. I pressed the call button for the nurse. Could you help me with something? I asked when she arrived. I need to speak with my doctor about accelerating my discharge planning. There are some important matters I need to handle personally. The nurse looked concerned. You've just had major heart surgery. The standard recovery time. I understand, I interrupted gently, but some circumstances have changed, and I need to be present for certain legal proceedings. If I promise to follow all medical advice and have proper care at home, could we at least discuss the possibility? She nodded reluctantly. I'll ask the doctor to come by during rounds this morning. While waiting, I called Jessica to update her on everything that had happened. Those snakes, she exclaimed after hearing about David and Patricia's actions. Want me to go slash their tires? I laughed for the first time since before the surgery. Tempting, but I have a better plan. Can you come to the hospital? I could use some help preparing for what's next. I'll be there in 45 minutes with real food that isn't hospital garbage, she promised. By the time Jessica arrived, I had already spoken with my doctor, who reluctantly agreed to consider an early discharge in 3 days if my recovery continued to progress well. Mr. Henderson had also called back, confirming that the title company was cooperating fully and that the funds from the sale, just over $380,000, had been frozen pending investigation. They sold it for way below market value, Jessica said, outraged when I told her the amount. That guest cottage and tasting room alone should have been worth at least $550,000 in today's market. They were in a hurry, I replied. Needed to close before I woke up and discovered what they'd done. As Jessica helped me organize a timeline of events and gather evidence from my phone, including screenshots of text messages I'd found on David's phone before the surgery, my mind kept returning to one detail: Patricia's smug certainty that she'd won. She has no idea what's coming, does she? Jessica asked, reading my expression. None, I confirmed, a small grim smile forming despite my pain. And I can't wait to see her face when she finds out. 3 days after my conversation with Robert Martinez, I was discharged from the hospital with a strict care plan in place. Jessica drove me directly to the Vineyard, where we had coordinated with Mr. Henderson to ensure the timing aligned perfectly with his legal maneuvers. According to his most recent update, the sheriff would be delivering the legal notices at 3 p.m., precisely when we expected to arrive. Are you sure you're up for this? Jessica asked as we turned onto the familiar Vineyard Road leading to the property. We could wait at a hotel until it's over. I need to see it, I said firmly. I need to be there when they realize what they've done. As the house came into view, my breath caught. Even after everything, the sight of the afternoon sun filtering through the oak trees and casting shadows across the weathered stone of the main house filled me with a sense of homecoming. Several vehicles were parked in the circular driveway: David's Tesla, Patricia's luxury BMW, a truck bearing the logo of a construction company, and an official sheriff's department vehicle. Perfect timing, Jessica said, pulling in behind the sheriff's car. Walking was still difficult, so Jessica helped me from the car. We moved slowly toward the main house, where we could hear raised voices coming from the stone terrace overlooking the vineyard. As we rounded the corner, the scene came into full view. Patricia stood at the terrace railing, red-faced and gesticulating wildly at Sheriff Rodriguez, who maintained professional calm while holding a thick envelope. David sat in one of the wrought iron chairs, his head in his hands. A couple I didn't recognize, presumably the buyers, stood awkwardly to one side with Robert Martinez. This is preposterous, Patricia was shouting. We completed the sale legally. You can't just invalidate a closed real estate transaction because someone changes their mind. Ma'am, I'm not invalidating anything, Sheriff Rodriguez replied evenly. I'm simply delivering legal notice of the consequences triggered by the sale, as stipulated in the original deed and trust documents. What consequences? What are you talking about? Patricia demanded, snatching the envelope from his hands and tearing it open. That's when she noticed me standing at the edge of the terrace, leaning heavily on Jessica's arm. You, she hissed, her expression morphing from anger to shock. What are you doing here? You should be in the hospital. I wouldn't miss this for the world, Patricia, I replied, my voice steady despite my physical weakness. David's head snapped up at the sound of my voice. Emma, what? How did you know? What you did? I finished for him. Robert Martinez called me the morning after the sale. Seems there was some confusion about exactly what property had been sold. Robert stepped forward, looking uncomfortable but professional. As I explained to Mrs. Williams, Patricia, that is, the buyers were surprised to discover that their purchase only included the guest cottage portion of the property, not the main vineyard. That's ridiculous, Patricia snapped. We sold the entire Sunset Valley property. No, I corrected, moving carefully to sit in the chair furthest from David. You sold Lot 15C, which is only the guest cottage and 2.3 acres. The main house and vineyard is Lot 15A, a separate legal entity. That's a technicality, David stammered. The power of attorney was for medical decisions only, Sheriff Rodriguez interjected. According to our review of the documentation, it explicitly excluded property and financial matters. Mr. Henderson, who had been standing quietly near the French doors leading into the house, stepped forward with another document in hand. Allow me to explain the situation clearly, he said. I'm Frank Henderson, attorney for Emma Williams and previously for Rose Mitchell, her grandmother. Ms. Mitchell anticipated potential disputes over this property and established specific legal protections. He addressed the buyers directly. Your purchase of Lot 15C, the guest cottage property, is technically valid, though executed through fraud. You have two options: maintain ownership of that portion knowing the circumstances, or rescind the sale for a full refund. The husband, a man in his 50s, exchanged glances with his wife before responding. We had no idea about any of this. We were told we were purchasing the entire vineyard from a family selling due to medical expenses. A common misrepresentation, Mr. Henderson nodded. As for you, he turned to David and Patricia. The actions you took triggered the fraud protection clause in Rose Mitchell's will and trust. Let me read it verbatim. He put on reading glasses and recited from the document. Any attempt to sell, transfer, or encumber any portion of the property without the explicit written consent of Emma Mitchell Williams, as evidenced by her signature on appropriate legal documents, shall trigger immediate enforcement of the following conditions. First, all ownership interest in all vineyard properties shall vest exclusively with Emma Mitchell Williams, terminating any marital property interest or inheritance rights of her spouse. Second, any proceeds from such unauthorized sale shall be the sole property of Emma Mitchell Williams, and any appropriation of said funds by other parties shall constitute conversion of assets. Patricia's face had gone from red to white as Mr. Henderson spoke. That's absurd. No court would uphold such vindictive conditions. Two courts already have, Mrs. Williams, Mr. Henderson replied calmly. This exact clause has been reviewed and affirmed by the county court and the state appellate court when Rose established the trust. It is legally binding and immediately enforceable. David finally found his voice. What does this mean exactly? In practical terms, Mr. Henderson turned to him. In practical terms, it means several things. First, the property you're currently standing on belongs exclusively to Emma, with your marital interests legally terminated. Second, the $380,000 you received from selling the guest cottage legally belongs to Emma, not to you. Third, your withdrawal and use of those funds constitutes conversion of assets, possibly rising to the level of grand theft, depending on the amount spent. We were paying for her medical care. Patricia protested. My medical expenses are covered by insurance, I said quietly, with a manageable out-of-pocket maximum that I can easily afford from my own savings. You know that, Patricia. You saw the policy documents when you were helping organize our paperwork. Sheriff Rodriguez cleared his throat. In addition to delivering these legal notices, I'm also here to inform you that the district attorney is reviewing this matter for possible criminal charges of fraud, forgery, and grand theft. In the meantime, the funds from the sale have been frozen by court order. David looked devastated, the full impact of their actions finally sinking in. Emma, we never meant to. Save it, I interrupted, too tired for his excuses. You betrayed me at my most vulnerable moment. You conspired with your mother to steal my inheritance while I was unconscious, recovering from surgery. What exactly did you mean to do? We meant to secure our future, Patricia said, her chin lifting defiantly despite her pale face. This property was wasted on you, always sitting mostly empty, just a monument to sentimentality while medical bills piled up. It wasn't yours to decide, I replied simply. And now you've lost everything. The buyers, who had been listening in stunned silence, finally spoke up. The wife stepped forward. We want no part of this situation. We'd like to rescind our purchase and receive our money back. Mr. Henderson nodded. A wise decision. I'll prepare the paperwork immediately. Robert Martinez looked profoundly uncomfortable. On behalf of my agency, I want to express our deepest apologies. Had we known about the forgery and misrepresentation, you should have verified the power of attorney more carefully, Mr. Henderson interrupted. But that's a matter for another day. For now, please coordinate with my office on the sale rescission. As the legal details were being discussed, Patricia suddenly lunged toward me, her face contorted with rage. You ungrateful little. Sheriff Rodriguez moved with surprising speed, stepping between us. Ma'am, I strongly advise against whatever you are about to do or say. Your situation is precarious enough already. Patricia froze, then collected herself with visible effort. "This isn't over," she said, her voice low and venomous. "No one humiliates me like this." "You humiliated yourself, Patricia," I said wearily. "I would have shared this place with family who respected it. Instead, you tried to steal it and lost everything." I turned to Sheriff Rodriguez. "I'd like them removed from my property now, please." "Of course, Mrs. Williams." He faced David and Patricia. "You have 10 minutes to collect any personal belongings and leave the premises. After that, your presence will constitute trespassing." David made one last desperate attempt. "Emma, please.
We can work this out.
I love you." "You should have thought of that before you forged my signature," I replied, unable to keep the hurt from my voice. "Divorce papers will be delivered to you tomorrow. Don't bother contesting them. Mr. Henderson has gathered enough evidence of your actions to ensure the judge will be thoroughly unimpressed by any claims you might make." As Sheriff Rodriguez escorted them to gather their things, I finally allowed myself to slump in the chair, the adrenaline that had kept me going beginning to fade. Jessica sat beside me, taking my hand.
"You did it," she said.
"You stood your ground, and Grandma Rose's plan worked." "Grandma Rose did it," I corrected, tears finally flowing freely. "She knew. Somehow she knew they might try something like this." Mr. Henderson approached after ensuring David and Patricia were indeed collecting their belongings. "Your grandmother was a wise woman who understood human nature. She saw how they looked at this property, not as a home, but as an asset." I gazed out at the vineyard, its rows of vines heavy with late summer grapes almost ready for harvest. "I've lost the guest cottage. All those memories. The structure, yes," Mr. Henderson acknowledged. "But not the land itself. Once the sale is rescinded, you'll still own the entire property. You can rebuild." As we watched David and Patricia drive away, followed by the sheriff, Robert, and the buyers, a strange sense of peace settled over me despite the pain and exhaustion. This place had always been my sanctuary, and now, ironically, their attempt to take it had only cemented my claim to it more thoroughly than before. "What will you do now?" Jessica asked softly. "First, recover from surgery," I said with a small smile. "Then rebuild, both the guest cottage and my life without David." The sun was beginning to set over the vineyard, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson just as it had during all those evenings with Grandma Rose on the terrace. "She would be proud of you," Mr. Henderson said, following my gaze. "I know," I replied. "And somehow, I think she's still looking out for me." The weeks following the confrontation brought a whirlwind of legal proceedings, physical recovery, and emotional processing. I moved permanently into the Vineyard house, finding that the peaceful setting accelerated my healing more effectively than any medication. Jessica stayed with me initially, helping with daily tasks until I regained enough strength to manage on my own. My medical team arranged for local follow-up care, and a home health nurse visited twice weekly to monitor my recovery. Physically, I was improving steadily. Emotionally, I oscillated between vindication, grief, and occasional moments of doubt about the harshness of the consequences David and Patricia faced. Those doubts usually dissipated whenever Mr. Henderson updated me on their continuing attempts to evade responsibility. 3 weeks after being removed from the property, Patricia filed a countersuit claiming emotional distress and challenging the validity of my grandmother's trust provisions. "It's a desperate move," Mr. Henderson assured me over coffee on the terrace one morning. "The judge assigned to the case has already indicated her skepticism. Patricia's lawyer is competent enough to know they're fighting a losing battle." "And David?" I asked, still finding it difficult to say his name without a pang of betrayal. Mr. Henderson's expression softened slightly. "He's distancing himself from his mother's more aggressive actions. His lawyer has reached out about a potential settlement regarding the divorce." I sighed, watching a red-tailed hawk circle over the vineyard. "What's he offering?" "Full admission of wrongdoing, no claims on any of your assets or property, and a quick, uncontested divorce. In exchange, he's asking that you don't pursue criminal charges for the forgery." I considered this while sipping my tea. The betrayal still cut deep, but the thought of drawn-out criminal proceedings exhausted me. "What do you think?" Legally, his offer is more than fair, Mr. Henderson said carefully. You'd walk away with everything, and he'd avoid potential jail time. The personal aspect is entirely your decision. That afternoon, I called Jessica to discuss the offer. He committed actual crimes, Emma, she reminded me, her protective instincts flaring. Forgery, fraud, theft. Why should he get off without consequences? The consequences are already significant, I pointed out. He's losing his marriage, his reputation in the tech community is ruined, and, according to Mr. Henderson, his consulting firm has terminated their contract pending the outcome of all this. Still not enough for betraying someone during heart surgery, Jessica muttered. Maybe not, I acknowledged, but pursuing criminal charges means prolonging this chapter of my life. More depositions, testimony, court appearances. I'm not sure my health can take it right now. In the end, I accepted David's settlement offer with one additional condition. He would need to provide a written account of exactly what happened, including when the plan was conceived and how they executed it. Not for legal purposes, but for my own closure. His 12-page letter arrived 5 days later by courier. Reading it was painful but illuminating. The plan had indeed been Patricia's, originally conceived shortly after my grandmother's funeral. She had spent months planting seeds of financial fear in David's mind, gradually convincing him that my illness would bankrupt us and that the underutilized Vineyard was the solution. I know these words mean nothing, he wrote near the end, but I will regret this betrayal for the rest of my life. I allowed my mother's influence and my own financial anxieties to override my love and respect for you. There is no excuse, only shame. I folded the letter and placed it in my grandmother's old desk drawer. Perhaps someday I would find forgiveness, but that day was still distant. Patricia's legal challenges continued to fail spectacularly. The judge not only dismissed her countersuit but ordered her to pay my legal fees. When the district attorney presented her with the option to either face criminal charges or make financial restitution, she finally backed down, agreeing to repay the money she had already spent from the fraudulent sale, nearly $45,000 on a new car and luxury items. Hell hath no fury like a country club membership revoked, Jessica commented when I told her about Patricia's sudden capitulation. Apparently, word of the fraud had spread through their social circles, leading to her being asked to resign from several organizations. By the time autumn painted the surrounding hills in shades of gold and crimson, the legal matters were largely resolved. The divorce was finalized in record time, with David making no claims on any assets. Patricia had been forced to liquidate some of her jewelry collection to make restitution, and I had begun interviewing architects about rebuilding the guest cottage. During this period, I unexpectedly found allies among my neighbors in the valley. Maria and Carlos Fernandez, an elderly couple whose smaller vineyard adjoined mine, had apparently never trusted Patricia. Something off about that woman, Maria told me bluntly during an impromptu visit bearing homemade tamales. Always asking nosy questions about property values and whether Rose had considered selling before she passed. She even approached us once, Carlos added, settling into a chair on the terrace. Wanted to know if we'd be interested in a joint venture to purchase this place if it ever came on the market. Said it would be better for the valley than having an absentee owner. Their support, along with that of other neighbors, created an unexpected sense of community I hadn't fully experienced during my previous visits. I'd always seen the vineyard as a private retreat, but now found myself hosting small gatherings on the terrace or joining the Fernandez family for their weekly domino games. As my physical strength returned, I began tackling small renovation projects on the main house. I painted the kitchen cabinets a warm sage green, replaced the worn tiles in the guest bathroom with natural stone, and restored the original hardwood floors throughout. Each improvement felt like reclaiming the space, erasing the shadow of betrayal that had briefly fallen over it. One crisp November morning, Robert Martinez called with an unexpected development. Mrs. Williams, I've been contacted by a young couple interested in the guest cottage property, or rather, where it stood. They're aware of the situation and specifically asked if you might be willing to sell just that portion again. My immediate instinct was refusal, but something made me pause. Tell me about them. The Changs, Kevin is a sommelier at a restaurant in the city. Lisa is a graphic designer who works remotely. They have a young daughter, about 7 years old. They've been saving for years for a place in wine country, but can only afford something modest. When they heard about what happened with your guest cottage, they wondered if there might be an opportunity. They're not investors or flippers. They genuinely want to build a small family retreat where they can teach their daughter about winemaking and agriculture. I thought about my own childhood summers here, the magic of growing up with the vineyard as a playground and classroom. Have them come by, I decided. I'd like to meet them first. The Chong family visited that weekend. Their daughter Lily immediately gravitated toward the old oak tree where Grandma Rose had hung a swing, while her parents apologized profusely for her enthusiasm. She's been dreaming of a place like this since we took her to a harvest festival last year, Lisa explained, watching Lily with a mixture of embarrassment and pride. Over the course of the afternoon, I found myself warming to the family. They weren't wealthy or connected, just hard-working people who valued the same things about wine country that my grandmother had taught me to appreciate. When Lily correctly identified several different grape varieties growing in my vineyard, knowledge she'd apparently picked up from library books, something clicked into place. 3 weeks later, with Mr. Henderson's guidance, I sold them the guest cottage lot for a fair but affordable price, with specific provisions. They would build in a style complementary to the main house. Construction would respect the existing oak trees and natural landscape, and they would grant me right of first refusal should they ever decide to sell. Are you sure about this? Jessica asked when I told her about the sale. After everything that happened? That's exactly why I'm sure, I replied. What David and Patricia did was try to take something precious for their own gain. This is the opposite, sharing something precious so more people can enjoy it. That's what Grandma Rose would have done. The day the Changs broke ground on their new cottage, I stood at the edge of my property watching Lily help by carrying small stones to mark the foundation. Maria Fernandez joined me, passing a thermos of hot chocolate. Rose would approve, she said simply. I think so too, I agreed. From the ashes of betrayal, something new and unexpected was growing. Not just a rebuilt structure, but a rebuilt sense of community and purpose. The vineyard was no longer just my private sanctuary, but part of a larger tapestry of lives and stories continuing to unfold among these hills. As for David and Patricia, the last I heard, they had moved to Arizona, where Patricia's other sister had reluctantly taken them in. Sometimes consequences come not just through courts and legal documents, but through the natural dissolution of the life you thought you were building. Winter descended on Sunset Valley with a quiet beauty that matched my contemplative mood. The vineyard rose lay dormant under a light frost, the bare vines looking skeletal, but somehow peaceful in their rest. For the first time, I experienced the vineyard through all 4 seasons, discovering the unique character each brought to this special place. My physical recovery progressed steadily. By January, I was strong enough to take daily walks through the dormant vineyard, bundled against the cold, but revitalized by the crisp air. My cardiologist reported that my heart function was improving beyond their initial projections. Your case is remarkable, Dr. Kim told me during a checkup. Often stress exacerbates heart conditions, but despite everything you've been through, you're healing faster than we anticipated. It's the vineyard, I said simply. Being here heals something deeper than just physical symptoms. The main house underwent its own transformation. Room by room, I reimagined spaces that had remained largely unchanged since my grandmother's time. The renovations weren't about erasing her presence, but honoring it while creating something that reflected my own journey. The formal dining room, rarely used, became a light-filled office where I returned to the wine marketing work I'd neglected during my illness, this time as a freelance consultant specializing in small family wineries. The dark paneling in the living room was painted a warm cream, allowing the original craftsmanship to shine while brightening the space. Upstairs, I converted the smallest bedroom into a meditation room overlooking the vineyard. Each change felt like a declaration. This space is mine, rightfully mine, and I am building a future here. Jessica visited frequently, eventually accepting my offer to stay in the main house temporarily while reassessing her own life path. Just until spring, she insisted when arriving with more suitcases than someone staying temporarily should reasonably have. I need a break from city life, and you need someone to reach the high shelves while you're still recovering. Her presence filled the house with laughter and practicality in equal measure. On evenings when memories and doubts crept in, she was there with terrible reality shows, homemade popcorn, and an unfailing ability to put things in perspective. "You know what I realized today?" she said one rainy evening as we sat by the fireplace. "You've never once said, 'I should have known,' or 'How could I have been so stupid about David's betrayal?'" I considered this while watching the flames. Blaming myself would give his actions more power. Besides, trust isn't stupidity, even when it's misplaced. The Chang's new cottage rose steadily through the winter, a smaller but charming echo of the original guest cottage. Kevin often stopped by to update me on their progress, sometimes bringing architectural questions or simply sharing his family's excitement about their first harvest season. "We're still pinching ourselves," Lisa confessed during one visit. "We never thought we'd actually have a place here. Lily's already planning her first sleepover in the cottage when it's finished." Watching their family's joy in creating their own vineyard memories brought an unexpected healing. What Patricia and David had tried to destroy was being reborn in a different form, one that honored the property's purpose as a place of connection and renewal. By early spring, significant changes had taken root in my life beyond the physical renovations. I established the Rose Mitchell Foundation for Sustainable Agriculture, using part of my divorce settlement to fund scholarships for young people studying viticulture and sustainable farming. The foundation's first project, in partnership with Kevin Chong, was a mentorship program pairing experienced vintners with aspiring winemakers. "You've turned this whole terrible experience into something that benefits the entire wine community," Maria Fernandez observed during one of our now regular coffee meetings. Not many people would respond that way to betrayal. "It wasn't a conscious decision," I admitted. "It just felt right, like something Grandma Rose would have done." In April, precisely 1 year after my surgery and the betrayal that followed, I received an unexpected letter. The return address was from Arizona, but it wasn't from David or Patricia. Instead, it was from David's father's brother, Uncle Robert, with whom I'd always had a warm if distant relationship. "I feel compelled to write to you after finally learning the full extent of what my sister-in-law and nephew did," he wrote. "Please know that not everyone in this family supports or condones their actions. Patricia has always been driven by appearances and material gain, values my late brother unfortunately failed to counterbalance during their marriage." He continued with an update I hadn't sought but found strangely satisfying. "David has finally begun separating himself from his mother's influence. He's moved out of her sister's house and taken a position teaching technology at a community college, a significant step down from his previous consulting career, but perhaps a necessary humbling. Patricia is predictably furious about this development, considering it another betrayal in her narrative of victimhood." I folded the letter thoughtfully after reading it. There was no desire for reconciliation, but a small measure of peace in knowing that perhaps David was finding his own path toward redemption. That same week, Mr. Henderson delivered the final paperwork officially closing all legal matters related to the property dispute and divorce. "It's truly over now," he said, accepting a glass of lemonade on the newly restored terrace. "How does it feel?" I gazed out at the vineyard where the first tender green shoots were appearing on the dormant vines. The Chang's children were carefully planting a small vegetable garden on their adjacent property. Maria Fernandez was teaching her visiting grandchildren how to identify different grape varieties. The landscape was coming alive again after winter, new growth emerging from soil that had seemed dormant but had been quietly preparing for renewal all along. "It feels like I've been carrying a heavy backpack for miles, and I've finally been able to set it down," I said. "Not because the journey is over, but because I found a better way to travel." "Rose would be proud," Mr. Henderson said, "not for the first time. Not just of how you protected what she left you, but of what you're creating from it." As spring bloomed into summer, the vineyard became more than just my personal sanctuary. The newly completed Chong cottage brought the sounds of family life back to that portion of the property. My home office hosted a small network of wine industry professionals. The Foundation's mentorship programs brought young viticulturists for day visits to learn about sustainable farming practices. Jessica finally did move back to the city, though she reserved her right to indefinite vineyard privileges and her own designated guest room. In her place came a rotation of friends, family members, and occasionally retreat participants for the mindfulness weekends I'd begun hosting in partnership with my physical therapist. One evening in late June, I sat alone on the terrace, watching the sunset paint the sky in vibrant purples and golds reflected in the wine glasses from that day's tasting event. A year had passed since the surgery that had been meant to heal my heart, but had unexpectedly led to healing much more than that. The betrayal by David and Patricia had been devastating in the moment, a violation of trust that cut to the core of our relationship. But in its aftermath, I had discovered strengths I didn't know I possessed and built connections I might never have formed. The vineyard remained mine, as my grandmother had intended, but rather than clinging to it possessively as Patricia would have done, I had found joy in sharing it thoughtfully, selectively, with people who appreciated its true value. In doing so, I had transformed it from a symbol of what I'd almost lost into a testament to what I'd found. The heart condition would always be part of my life, requiring management and care, but it no longer defined my future or limited my vision of what was possible. Like the vineyard itself, sometimes flourishing, sometimes dormant, always changing, my path forward had revealed itself as something seasonal and full of potential. As darkness fell and the first stars appeared, I made my way back to the house where lights glowed warmly from windows that had once seemed sad and empty during my grandmother's absence. Now they represented something different, not just a legacy preserved, but a life reclaimed and reinvented on my own terms. The greatest lesson, perhaps, was one my grandmother had tried to teach me all along. True ownership isn't about possession or control, but about stewardship and appreciation. Patricia had seen only the monetary value of the vineyard and had lost everything in her attempt to claim it. I had recognized its deeper worth, and in fighting to protect it, had gained far more than just property. Some betrayals leave only wreckage in their wake, but others, when faced with clarity and courage, can become unexpected catalysts for growth and transformation. My inheritance had turned out to be not just the vineyard itself, but the resilience to rebuild what matters most when life's storms damage the structures we thought would always stand. Have you ever experienced a betrayal that ultimately led to something positive in your life? Or inherited something precious that others didn't understand the true value of? Share your stories in the comments below. I've found that sharing our journeys helps all of us feel less alone in life's challenges. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that sometimes what feels like an ending can actually be the beginning of something even more beautiful. Thank you for listening, and remember, the most important property we'll ever own is not measured in acres, but in how well we care for ourselves and those we choose to welcome into our lives.